So I'd like to say good evening to everybody. We're sorry to apologize for starting slightly late. We've had some minor technical problems at the last minute. I've had to change computer, and so I'd like to welcome you here to this last translation capsule in the current season, which I think is our ninth or 10th season, which we've been doing this since the COVID confinement. My name's Richard Sampson, and I'm going to be the institutional host this evening. And we're very pleased to have with us Caterina Riba, who's going to be speaking to Martha Tennent about translating novels from Catalan into English. And we're very grateful also to a series of other organizations that I had on screen, but I had to change computer, so I'm not going to name them, but they are on our webpage and you can see them there. So thanks to all the people who've given their support to these events. And there are not so many of us here now, but these events are recorded and then we publish them online, and there's quite a big anthology of previous translation capsules, and they are consulted quite widely and used by students and teachers alike. So that's great. Now, during the session, you don't have a microphone if you're one of the spectators, but or the attendees, but you can certainly ask questions in the chat, and I'll collect them up if Martha or Caterina doesn't see them during the session, and we'll hope that they'll answer our questions as we get to the end of the session. So I think that we'll expect a conversation maybe of about half an hour if the technology doesn't let us down. Depends how heated or excited it gets, and then we'll have some question and answer at the end. And thanks very much for coming. And of course, this, as I said, this is the last one in the current series, but we're going to have more translation capsules in the new year. So watch this space, watch Tradiling or watch hashtag ConversaTrad. Thanks very much. Caterina, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We're very happy to welcome Martha Tennent. Among her numerous achievements, she was the founding dean of the Faculty of Translation and Interpreting at the University of Big. So for us, it's an absolute pleasure that she accepted our invitation. Martha Tennent is a literary translator from Catalan and Spanish into English. She has translated or co-translated 17 works of fiction as well as short stories. Her catalogue of authors includes Maria Àngels Anglada, Miquel Bausà, Imma Monzó, Blai Bonet, and of course, Mercè Rodoreda. Her most recent translation, 2025, has been Isabel Clara Simós' The Wild One, La Salvatge. It is actually a co-translation. On this occasion, as on many others, Martha Tennent has worked with Maruxa Relaño, who also happens to be her daughter. We'll come back to that. Well, welcome and good afternoon, Martha Tennent.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. Caterina, Richard, Marcos, all of you. It's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure, Caterina.
Can I just ask you, I'm just going to jump in again, Caterina, because this is being recorded. Can you change the camera so that you're slightly, can you change it so that it's pointing a bit lower, Martha, the camera, or not? That's better. Yes, because this is for posterity. So that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
We would have dealt with that before we started, but we had other technical problems that are even greater.
Right.
Okay, so there's been a lot of talk recently, once again, about Mercè Rodoreda with the National Theatre's production of La Mort y la Primavera and the major exhibit dedicated to her at the CCCB. I know you have translated alone or with your co-translator, Maruxa Relaño, 3 of her novels, as well as her collection of short stories, for which you were awarded a $25,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Maybe we can just start with you telling us how you first began literary translation and especially how you came to work on Marcel Rodoreda.
Right. Well, as you know, the years that I was the dean at the University of Vic, we were training translators and interpreters, but I had no time myself to do any translations. So it was after I moved to New York that an editor from the online magazine Words Without Borders, and if I have time, I would speak more about this wonderful digital magazine that it's now in its 20th year. So I was approached by one of the editors and asked to translate some stories by Rodoreda, Merced Rodoreda. I've always been a fan of, especially short stories, all of Rodoreda, frankly, but the short stories, especially the ones in 22 contos, which are the main short stories that I translated. And they're urban narratives that reflect very much Rodoreda's personal experience of exile and penury and uh, the disenchanted state. And they're full of illnesses and sadness, suicide, fear. Nothing that Rodoreda writes is ever going to be a happy story. Not the short stories, not her novels. So here I am. I began translating them and publishing them in a variety of magazines. And then there was one particular story that the editor of Open Letter Books, Chad Post, read, and he contacted me and he asked me if I would translate Death in Spring. Now, I don't think that Chad had any idea what Death in Spring was. He had read uh, La Plaza del Diamant. I think he was expecting something totally different, but he commissioned me to translate it, and I went ahead and did it. It's this, if you've read it, it's this haunting, cruel novel of uh, violence, ritual violence, but at the same time, it's lyrical, and it's really almost painfully beautiful at times. And of course, my problem is how am I going to do justice to this novel, this strange novel that was so harsh. So I found basically inspiration in two different sources. One was in the Gothic writing of Angela Carter. I'm a real fan of Angela Carter. So I found inspiration in the topic thematically in Angela Carter and also in the very rich vocabulary and style of writers that Rodoreda admired, that D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf. So these are these are writers that I was reading at the same time, looking for uh, an intertext, some information, how I can bring this novel into English. There's a lot of interior dialogue, monologue, stream of consciousness, and Death in Spring. So, we're also looking at Faulkner, um, writers that English reading public would be familiar with, let's say that would. So then we have this extraordinarily strange, cruel novel where the houses are painted pink every year and where the wisteria is pulling up the houses. This is a completely surrealistic novel. And I remember when I came to this point, I can't really say the wisteria is pulling up the houses. That just seems so really tame for this extraordinary novel. I think I spent weeks trying to find a verb that could match this situation until finally I had to come up with a neologism, which was to upwrench, which does not exist in English, but it's very clear what the verb means. So here we have the wisteria that is upwrenching the houses in this strange town. Another example was toward the end when Rodoreda refers to la mort abrada. So what do you do with this? In Death in Spring, the townspeople are entombed in trees, within the trees, and then their mouths are filled with cement so the souls do not escape. So after some thought, La Morta Brada, I came up with Abhor Death. And fortunately, I'm working with an editor who was very easy to work with. You want, Abhor Death, you can have Abhor Death. So there we are. There's another term, it's one of the words was pignol. So each person in this town, this no-name town, has its own tree. And within the tree, there is this pignol that is sort of the essence of each person. But pignol is, like the stone of a fruit. And I thought, I can't call this a stone. What do I do here? So in the end, I went with a term I called seed case. This is a word that exists. So that's some of the difficulties I had trying to balance the Gothic with the lyrical. And I know that, Open Letter, they were pleased with this. Though they were not expecting this, as Chad Post told me. So there were two other novels by Rodoreda that translated. Both of them were co-translations. One is Garden by the Sea. So this is at the antipodes of Death in Spring. Here we have this benevolent gardener who observes the wealthy families and friends who come to this villa by the sea over 6 summers. And one of the problems that we had was how to convey the subtlety of what is not said, what is not voiced, what is only implied, what is left unsaid. And then, of course, this is a garden. So we're going to have all of Rodoreda's botanical lexicon, which is always a nightmare. And but it's a lovely novel, Garden by the Sea, where nothing much seems to happen. It's a very slow moving novel, sort of this an unapologetic lethargy. So this is what my co-translator termed and the slow melancholy. So there's this life of perpetual waiting that we said where, as I say, not much is laid out, but there is this slowly developing unease among the characters and intrigue that will, of course, end in catastrophe. This is Rodoreda. So no happy endings, no happy novels. The other novel that we co-translated was War So Much War, Quanta Quanta Guerra. It's this sort of coming of age story, character Adrià, this sort of magical quality, dreamlike story as he wanders through life. War is always on the fringes. We don't really see the war, but it's this journey in the castle and an old crone in a village, all of these elements of sort of a fairy tale, if you wish, and this encounter of um, innocence and evil, this allegorical uh, description. It's also a beautiful novel, I think. Disturbing, yes. So that shifting between dreams and realities, it's rather episodic, picaresque. So, as in many of our collaborations, we had several arguments here. I remember I was spending 4 months on the island of Corfu, and Marusha joined me for a month. And so we're there translating together and working over. And one of the things that we had trouble agreeing upon is how to treat mother, the protagonist's mother. So we can't say Marta in Catalan because then it's read, mare. We're not going to say mum. So we went with sometimes calling the mother figure mother in English and sometimes, mama with accent grave. So I realized that mama we don't really use in Catalan, but we are marking this as foreign, reminding the reader that this is a foreign culture, foreign text that you're reading. So that's one of the things that we had to negotiate. Sometimes it was mother, sometimes it was mama. And one of the other things that comes to mind is that later in the novel, there's a chapter called Fear. We gave it the title Fear. Mercè Rodoreda called it Una mica de por. We never could decide why it should be called Una mica de por because the protagonist is scared shitless and he's walking through the forest and he comes and he encounters a whole list of dangers and there is this real element of fear. And then he comes in contact with the great fear. Now, I wanted to capitalize great and fear as a way of personifying the fear. And my co-translator said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so what did we do? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. We've slammed some doors and screamed at each other a bit. And my co-translator goes off to bed. And I was in charge with one last proofreading, and then I was to send off the novel. So what did I do? Very carefully, I changed great fear to capital G, capital F, and sent it off and was very pleased with it. So there you are. Those are the novels and short stories that I or we have translated from the great Mercè Rodoreda. So there you are.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Rodoreda is certainly disturbing. And beyond Rodoreda, do you recall any work that was particularly difficult?
First of all, I think every translation is difficult. I don't care if it's instructions for a vacuum cleaner or instructions for a heat wave. I think every translation is difficult. But probably one of the most difficult I've ever translated was Miguel Bausá, the Mallorcan poet. And I think he lived the 40s and died in 2005. Very experimental, sort of fantastic. These sharp curves of non sequiturs. So my problem was I did this translation before working with a co-translator was how do you make intelligible in English, something that is not intelligible in the Catalan. So I thought, well, there's this edge of Kafka here, there's this bit of Samuel Beckett. So I went more with trying to give the novel a Beckettian touch. You know, we had the same ludicrous atmosphere, experimental, and this wild uh, protagonist whose lack of coherence is his own representation of his chaotic vision of what he sees as a brutal world. Uh, Sometimes it was so wild, let's say, these shifts that the editor and I decided that occasionally we would have to throw the reader a bone. So you jump from one thing to something else, none of which makes sense. So throw the reader a bone. You know, whether the reader caught the bone or not, I don't know. But I found translating Balsa very, very difficult. This expression of the protagonist's existential angst. So I don't know how we're doing on time. Can I read one paragraph? Have we out of time?
Go ahead.
I mean, I'll just read. It's, the first novel, Carré Marsala. Maybe the world hasn't always been sad. When we say our words are dragged down by inertia, we mean that what we learn as a pup stays with us. The same applies to other things. Girls, for example, use the phone but don't know its precise function. I spread my fingers. Carefully, I study the outline of their bones. Who can deny me this innocent activity? More than one person might be annoyed by it. Many people believe that it's impossible to agree with all your neighbors at the same time. Faced with this situation, isn't it only fair to choose what best suits me? That's just the first paragraph of Balsa. Very, a very complicated person who became a cult figure in Catalan literary circles. So definitely Balsa was really extremely difficult.
Okay. When you work with Maruxa Relaño, with your daughter, how do you organize the work?
How do we organize it?
Hmm.
Well, we've been translating for together for quite a while. I think most co-translations work along the lines of, I always refer to Podvir and Volokamsky. They were the Russian translators, collaborators, and they work in the more usual fashion, which is one person does a quick translation, almost a literal translation, and the second person comes in and polishes it and makes it into a more literary form. But with Marusha, our linguistic abilities were more or less the same. So we discussed it and we decided that wasn't how we wished to work. We just take a novel and split it down the middle. One of us takes the first half, the second takes, the second half, and then we translate and we revise and we go back and forth. I will say that the figure of an editor, uh, translation editor, someone who helps with the style rather, is a figure that really no longer exists in the English language world or here also. So not having a style editor, which is so useful, co-translating has fill that void for me. And because, we are mother-daughter and there's no political correctness, we can say whatever we wish, and we do. It's really helpful. So Marusha edits my act, I do hers, and then we swap. And I will say that by and large, I accept probably 90% of her suggestions, and the same for her. And so it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then we finally come together at the very end where we sit at the table across from each other with one master copy and go through the entire text and argue about each word. It might be worth pointing out that, we've been translating together for 15 years. I don't know. Maybe we're older, maybe. Maybe we are more mature, maybe. I think we yell at each other less. We do laugh a lot. We absolutely do laugh a lot as we go over our final versions and, nitpick about this word or that. And, have we given the interpretation we want to of this character? Have we, have we justified, what we wanted? Is this the right register? So, well, that's how we work together.
Okay, wonderful. And what was your experience with editors?
Excuse me. By and large, the experience has been very good as long as we could justify our choices, why we want this. They would, accept our points of view by and large. I would say I did 3 novels with Dalkey Archive, and this was run by the great John O'Brien, who died last year. And John O'Brien absolutely did not want any Britishisms. And I remember having to really negotiate with, for example, Balsa, but also uh, The Sea by Bly Bonnet. You know, if I'm going to do Balsa and influenced by Samuel Beckett, I want some Britishisms in here. So I had a great editor, Jeremy Davis. So I said, okay, Jeremy, can I have one bloke? Can I use DOS? DOS, the British term for sleeping. It's not well known at all in English. So, and we sort of, agreed. I will say, when we edited with the editor, it was not with John O'Brien, but it was with his publishing house, The Sea by Bly Bonnet. So with the editor, it was not Jeremy, it was not John O'Brien. Very, very clear specifications. Please, I want this, this. I've always wanted, for example, the color gray. I want the color gray to be written with an E, not the American preferred GRAY. So I had a list of certain things and I gave reasons, blah, blah. And then the editor, whose name I will not mention, said, absolutely fine, perfect, not a problem. When the book comes out, absolutely ignored every single thing that we had, wished to include. So you have editors and you have editors. So that was one of our our experiences.
And have you ever worked directly with the authors, Yolanda Bataller, Nuria Bendicho, Sebastián Zamora? Did you have any helpful conversations with them or any feedback after the translation was published?
Remember Jordi Punti wrote us a really nice email saying how much he had liked one of our translations. Actually, we have not worked much with the authors. A lot of the authors we've translated were dead, so that solved that problem right there. No consultations. Um, but most of what we were translating with, the writers you've mentioned, Nuria Bendicho, um, were quite clear. So it's just the occasional thing. I remember we did consult Sebastião Zamora at one point, who was absolutely charming. So that was, our experience. Also, we very much feel like the translated novel or short story is very much ours. It is the author's and ours. And our first responsibility is to the reader. So, there were not a whole lot of contact because we thought that our interpretation was what it should be. For example, there was one short story. I won't mention the author. And it happens sometimes she thought her English was, let's say, better than it was. And this happens. You hear some of these horror stories of translators and writers where the writer, wishes to change things because he thinks, he knows. And I remember this one particular short story. She really wanted me to change a line. The editor of the magazine wanted my version, but the writer said, no. So I changed it and left it to what she wanted, which is a sentence that was much less elegant, in my opinion. So there's been a bit of everything.
And in your experience, do translators usually pitch their translations to publishing houses, or are they commissioned? How did it work for you?
In my case, our cases, it's always been commissions. And I think this is usually the case. I think publishing houses, they go to all the big book fairs. They're all in Guadalajara. Every single one of them, they're in Guadalajara. They're in Frankfurt Book Fair. They're in the London Book Fair. And they shop around. They go from stand to stand. They look. They see something they think might be of interest. Maybe they request a synopsis or write-up opinion, and then they commission it. I have tried to pitch stories, novels. A novel I very much wanted to translate, and I pitched it to several places. No. Publishing houses, they have their own ideas. Also, publishing houses don't make money, so they're really careful. So they commission their own. That has been my experience, but I think it is the experience of most translators.
Okay. And could you tell us the tools you use in translating?
Right. I don't use many tools. And, being an older translator, I'm sure it's very different. I work very differently from, the younger translators. For example, I don't use artificial intelligence in a translation other than, an expression or something. I feel like the translations turn out to be soulless, and that you really need a human to work out the nuances. So I'll tell you what I use. I come across the Catalan um, word or phrase I don't know, I go to the absolutely marvelous dictionary Alcoven Moi. I think it's an absolutely fabulous dictionary. I have it in paper form, but I usually actually um, have it more on my computer online. And one of the good things about it is that they give you the translation into Spanish, which is also helpful. And then if you're translating all of the many names for flowers and botanical expressions from Rodoreda, then you're going to have the Latin. And then with the Latin, then you can find the English more easily. So I'm a huge, huge fan of the Alcoven Moi dictionary. A dictionary of synonyms. In my experience, the one I like the most is word hippo, Hippo. I find it very comprehensive. Also, there is a part of word hippo. Once you found the synonym you were looking for, you can use that in a sentence. Word hippo will use that in a sentence. And sometimes by using that in a sentence, it will give you a verb that you thought, this verb is really very helpful in this sentence. So those are two of the things. The third thing I use, it is artificial intelligence. It's called language tool. And I use it mostly for proofreading, but it's quite good. If it's free, if you use it just a little bit as I do, but if you were more interested, then you can pay something very nominal and you can have editing examples. They can say, for example, you have used 3 sentences in a row have begun with she. Consider rewriting this. So I find LT language tool very helpful, and also in a variety of languages. So this our last translation. It was a British. We were supposed to be, a British language, British English. So you think you know more or less, but then there was one point I was using the um, the zipper was broken or something, and language tool says, zipper's American English. The British use zip. I didn't know that, so we changed that to the zip was broken or whatever. So those are some of the tools I use. And then I think everyone who translates to a foreign language always has some expert in the language and the culture that they want to, they can consult with. So I have the good fortune to have Dulos Joanola. My co-translator refers to Dulos Joanola as the oracle. So her knowledge of the Catalan language and traditions and her wisdom in general is just absolutely amazing. And then her examples, each example she gives is just a work of literature. So I have a term, I don't know what it is, how to translate or what it means. I go to Alcoven Moi, I go here and I go there. I have no idea. I go to Dolores Stranola. And basically, if Dolores Stranola does not know, then you're fucked. At which point you interpret the way you wish to. And that's what translators do anyway. So those are my very simple tools.
Okay. Well, to finish, Martha has chosen a brief excerpt from Quanta Guerra by Rodoreda. I will read it in Catalan, and Martha will read it in her English version. So there we
If
go.
I can find it.
Do you have it?
Let me look. Let me see where it is. Sorry about that. Yeah, I remember this sentence. Where is this? Um, You don't have it. Let's see where it is. So, excuse me for not being organized.
Well, uh, maybe we can see if there are any questions from the attendees, and while you look for it.
Well,
Okay.
I'll jump back in if you like. There's one question very specific. There's Sylvia Garrigo asks about Martha's translation of La Ciutat Invisible de Emily Rosales.
Rosales. Yeah.
Why do you think that she's interested in that, Martha?
Why do I think she's interested in the novel?
No, in your translation of it. She says she's particularly interested in your translation of this novel.
What about my translation of it? Wow, that was a long time. It was that was a long time ago, and I'm not sure quite what to say. Um, I just think it came at a time when Barcelona was becoming more, on the map, books. And I really don't know what to say. Excuse me, I'm still looking for this. Is this a novel that Sylvia was I can't find this.
It's
Uh,
on the document I sent you at the very end.
I know where it probably is here. Sorry, that was very poor reply translated. Okay, here we go. Took me a while. I am so sorry.
You got it? Okay, so I'll start. It's just a sentence, you'll see, but it's a long, difficult sentence. So my turn.
Okay.
Tu, que tenies tot el temps per fer-la esperar, amb l'alegria de viure, amb el gust de la poma i de la pera, la magrana reial, corona de reina quan li cau la fulla rissada i surt la corona que tanca la capsa verda, dura, rodona, plena de brillants vermells com la sang quan et talles i te'n surt una gota de foc com un gra de magrana, amb el pinyol de fusta del color dels teus llavis. No el pinyol, sinó les fulles de la flor perseguides pel vent per deixar que rombegi la corona tendra.
Okay, there you are. So here's the English, which after a lot of work managed to follow the Catalan quite well. So here is the English that we wrote. This was from Cuento Cuentaguera. You who had all the time in the world to keep death waiting, with the joy of living, with the taste of apples and pears, of pomegranates, with their queenly royal crown that appears when their curly leaves fall and the crown emerges, sealing the hard, green, round box, filled with diamonds as red as the blood when you cut yourself, and a drop of fire appears like a pomegranate kernel, with its wooden seed the color of your lips, not the seed, but the leaves of the flower pursued by the winds, so that the tender crown may flaunt itself. So there you are.
Excellent. Wow. A very challenging translation indeed.
A-
Mhm.
am I still online?
Yes?
Can you see me?
Yes?
Okay. I do not see myself. I see you. So I'm not sure what happened, but
Yeah,
anyway.
I don't know, Richard, if there are any other questions, maybe.
Well,
Okay, so
some of the other questions I asked, which is not a very good thing. Um, I think I would like to ask the one that I said the one of them, which is which you answered one. I asked if you used chatbots to help you, and you answered
Mhm.
that already. No, I wanted to ask which authors that write about translation you most admire,
Which authors that write about translation?
or that have influenced you particularly, or that you most admire. Both, really, yes.
What instruments
No, that have influenced you
have influenced me?
and your approach.
Well, I think, I've probably answered that mostly. What I tend to read mostly about translation is that I follow very, very seriously the online magazine Words Without Borders that's in its 20th year. And they have now uh, published translations of poetry or short stories, narratives from 140 languages. And they have, it used to be monthly, and now it comes out, several times a month. But there are always comments on translation and interviews with translators and how they have approached their work. That is the one thing that I mostly read religiously. I'm in absolute in awe of this magazine. It's free, digital, Words Without Borders, that was started by three women who were editors in big publishing houses and started it up as a on a voluntary basis. And I'm a great admirer of their work, and of what they have done all these 20 years. So they began in 2003, and this is after the 9/11. So you have President Bush, and you have President Bush who pulls out of his hat this idea of the axis of evil, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, and he brings out a law that is prohibiting, by and large, literature from the axis of evil. So these gals who started Words Without Border, we're speaking 2003, one of their first uh, online issues was huge letters, literature from the axis of evil, Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and other enemies. So that's what I mostly, read on a regular basis in relation to translations.
So translation as the voice of protest and as transgressive. You're a rebel. Great. What do you
Okay.
want, Katrina? Should we ask any more questions? There's another one. Sylvia has, who I mentioned, has just come back in with a very more specific question. Let's see. She says, "I'm also interested in the translation of motion verbs from Catalan to English, since Catalan is a verb-framed language and English is a satellite-framed one. So I hope you're keeping up with this. In Catalan, the information of the trajectory of the motion verb is rendered through the verb, whereas in English it is rendered using so-called satellites, usually prepositions. So do you think that there's a difference in terms of the expression of motion between English original novels and those translated into English from Catalan? So I think she's saying that we use verb and prepositional verb and adverb combinations in English, whereas in Catalan you have a verb that gives the whole meaning. And does that affect? Have you noticed that? And does that affect the way you?
I'd actually not given any thought to it. What is obvious is that English is much more fixed. there's not the flexibility of Romance languages, and this you have to work around. One of the things that I have noticed is that there in Spanish, Catalan, even French, there's a lot of use of what a direct translation would be there is, there are, where English tends to favor strong verbs. So if you find there is something that would tend to be rather bland. So here's an example that comes to mind. It's an actual sentence from I think it was War So Much War. So the literal translation was there was a red light in the sky. Well, that's an acceptable sentence, but it's very bland. So we rendered that as a crimson light fretted the heavens. So you have the essence, but the impact is so radically different. So that is one.
What was the original in Catalan in that case?
The Catalan is there. There was a red light in the sky.
You're speaking English.
Oh dear, that is true. Hi havia un llum verd al cel.
Okay. Okay. Caterina, you want to ask anything else?
No, thank you. I'm fine. Thanks
Well,
so much, Martha.
yeah.
It's been it's been wonderful listening to you.
It's a great privilege for us to have you with us, and it was great to hear your the long sentence, very challenging long sentence in the original and the translation. We don't usually have people who are courageous enough to take it, to show themselves so totally as you have done there, and it was really great and fantastic to see you again. And as I say, apologies for the technical problems we had at the beginning, which we haven't completely overcome. I had to change computer just before we started, and but we are recording this, and I'll tidy it up a little for the recording. Nothing that you've said, of course. I'm not like one of your very strong-willed editors. What you've said will be in the recording, of course. And so with that, we're pulling down the blinds, let's say, on this season of translation capsules. Thanks for being with us. The the recording will be online soon in the coming days, and uh, keep an eye on us in the new year because we're going to have some more exciting translation capsules, which we look forward to very much. So thank you, everybody, and good evening if you're in Spain, in Catalonia, and goodbye if you're elsewhere.
Around the world. Thank you all very much for inviting me to participate in this. Thank you to all of you.